So taking a look at this last statement, I'd like to make a very important note, or I guess, a very important note. Let's say be careful with multiple if-else statements when you're using multiple if-else statements, because there's some common mistakes that are easy to make. So let's look at this first example right here. It says while 1 equals 1, and there's a bunch of brackets around it, right? You can assume there's a task main above it, another bracket below, whatever. But it says if the bump switch is pushed, turn the right motor on. That makes sense, right? Then it says if it's not pushed, turn the right motor off. And then it says if the limit switch is pushed, what does it want to do? Right motor on in reverse, exactly. And then if that's not pushed, of course, again, turn the right motor off. That's way too easy, right? It's obvious what they want to do. You push one switch, it goes forward. You push the other switch, it goes backwards. And if you're not pushing either, turn the motor off. But think about it. What happens if I push both switches at the same time? It can't go either direction, can it? But wait, hold on. If I'm pushing the bump switch, it goes deeper than that. If I push the bump switch and not the limit switch, if the limit switch is not pushed, what happens? The right motor is off. But if the bump switch is pushed, the right motor is on. This won't work. You type this in, you run it, your robot will do nothing. And you'll ask Mr. Anderson, why isn't it working? It's because these two statements contradict each other. So let's write that out. These two statements contradict each other. And we're talking about these two here. So using two if-else statements like this can get a little tricky. There are ways to do it. Let's replace this code right here at the top with the one right beneath it. So we'll say replace with. Okay. So what's going on in this statement? It says if the bump switch is pushed, turn the right motor on forward. Then it says else. And notice what's inside the else. Another if-else statement. It's an if-else statement inside an if-else statement. It's like Inception. It's like if Leonardo DiCaprio came in here and wrote your Robot C for you. Code within a code, right? An if-else statement, you get it. Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hardy. Great movie. So if the bumper is pushed, turn the motor on. If it's not pushed, check to see if the limit is pushed. If so, put it in reverse. If the limit switch isn't pushed, turn the right motor off. But it'll only check to see if the limit switch is not pushed if the bump switch is not pushed. And y'all see how this gets rid of that sort of contradiction? And so we would say if-else statement. Oh, let's write this in black. An if-else statement within an if-else statement. Now you might ask, well, Mr. Anderson, there's still the problem is if I push the bump switch and the limit switch at the same time, what will happen? And one of them will stay true and the other one won't work until you let go of the first one. And I don't remember if you push the bump switch first, then you push the limit switch. I think the limit switch, you have to check it. I think if you push the bump switch, then the limit switch, it'll do the limit switch and forget the bump switch. But it might just keep the bump switch until you let go of it if you're holding both. It's going to do one or the other. And then when you let go of one, the other one happens. If you're pushing both at the same time. That's how it would work, in case you were wondering. But you can see it doesn't contradict in the same way these two did. There's a third option, and this one's kind of cool. So let's do that. Let's draw an arrow from the second example to the third example. We could say another option. Notice it says if, and at the bottom else, but notice the second one says else if. An else if statement. Else if statements are really interesting. So put in parentheses else if, not if else. I've done that before where I typed in if else, not else if. Else if statements. So be careful with that. But an else if statement basically just gives you a third option. Presents a third option besides your if or your else. So if else is really good if you want one of two things to happen. If you want one of three things to happen, you can do an else if. And I assume you could do a four. I've never tried it, but I assume you could do a fourth option. So for example, let's say line followers, instead of the bump switch being pushed or not pushed, or the limit switch being pushed. Let's say I want one thing to happen. Let's say I want my right motor to spin forward if the line follower senses between 0 and 500. I want the right motor to spin backwards if it's between 500 and 1,000. I want the left motor to spin forward if it's above 1,000. I would say if, else, for example. That way you have three options instead of